This is about the beginning of the church and about its first years under its rector, Thaddeus Snively. In the years after 1871, after the Chicago fire, many Chicagoans were moving from the south and west sides north, and there was a feeling that another Episcopal church in the north side area was needed. They had St. James, they had Our Savior's, they had Ascension, but they felt that they needed one more, and St. James Mission opened in late 1885 in a storefront on Clark Street, west side of the street, south of North Avenue. And by 6 months later, in June 1886, it was attracting so many people from the St. James congregation that they decided it would be better to move it someplace north. So they rented another storefront just on west side of Clark Street, just south of Menominee. And they changed the name to All Saints Mission. A newspaper clipping, no date, no source, was saved in the parish archives, and it begins with the lead, a bartender sues a church. And what happened was that the owner of the site south of North Avenue, who was a bartender, had not been paid for the last month or so before the church moved north. And the priest in charge thought that the finance committee was going to take care of it. The finance committee thought the priest was going to take care of it, and nothing happened, and the bartender eventually got annoyed and sued, and they mission committee and the priest in charge talked and found out what had happened, and they each chipped in half the amount, and it was settled without any further issues. In the late 1880s, the church seems to have been thriving, and they had 153 members in 1889, but then in the early 90s things went downhill again, and All Saints Mission closed at the end of 1892 and had debts of $250. But it seems that they didn't want to give up on this mission, and a new priest was brought in, and under the Reverend Thaddeus Snively, the mission reopened on January 15th, 1893. He was a man in his early 40s, and he had had considerably more experience than you would expect from someone who was brought in to take over a struggling mission congregation. His previous pastorate had been for 1 year in the American Episcopal Church in Florence. And he had also, earlier in his career, served a couple of years at the American Episcopal Church in Geneva, and had been in parishes in Albany and Quincy, Massachusetts. And from 1881 to 1891, he was rector of St. John's Church in Troy, New York. We never knew much about him except just the straight facts that are in some of the who's who's. But when Bob Howell was rector from 67 through 90, he in the 80s got in touch with a grandson of Snively's and found out about the family background. Snively had married in what was, the grandson said, was an arranged marriage, and it had not been a happy one. And at some point, he and his wife were divorced. There were two sons who went to live with her and apparently saw very little of their father after the divorce because the mother moved to Canada and remarried. And we don't know when this happened, but it seems logical that this might have been what led him to leave his parish in Troy after 11 years. And I'm sure that a divorced priest in the 1890s would have had a very difficult time finding a position. And first he goes to Florence, completely out of the United States, apparently didn't want to stay there forever. And so I guess the best thing he could come up with was to revive this struggling mission congregation. He does seem to, the family does seem to have been well off, and he probably felt that financially he could afford to take a job that didn't pay very well. First official act as priest in charge is that he asks the diocese to approve a change of the name of the mission and to have it be called St. Chrysostom's. We don't really know why this is the case, but I have heard from more than one person who is knowledgeable enough that I think they may be correct that at that time, if you took the name of a saint that was not in the Bible or in the prayer book calendar, this probably indicated a degree of high churchmanship. And in the early years of St. Chrysostom's, they drew a number of people from St. James because the rector at St. James was very low church and they preferred St. Chrysostom's, which would seem to confirm this. But in the years, the 40s, 50s, and well on into the end of the 60s even, the church was strongly low church, and you would not have wanted to suggest this as a reason for the name. And it was said that because of All Saints Church in Ravenswood, you shouldn't have two churches in the diocese with the same name, so All Saints Mission had to change. And that they picked a saint whose feast day was January 27th, which was close to the time that the mission reopened. There were a few parishioners who remembered Snively, who were still living at the time of the parish's 75th anniversary. And one of them said that what she remembered was that he never forgot the birth dates of the children in the congregation, which is rather moving when you think that he probably saw very little of his own two sons. There was a history of the diocese called The Great 40 Years in the Diocese of Chicago, covering 1893 to 1933, written by John Henry Hopkins. And Hopkins had some comments about Snively. He said he was popular in every best sense, with possibly the most extensive social entree within the reach of any Chicago priest then or now. He adds, one can almost hear him even yet, pleading with someone, "Oh, don't say St. Chrysostom's," with the accent strongly on sauce. There is a novel that was published in 1899 called A Social Lion by Margaret Potter, and A leading character in this novel is said to be modeled on Snively, which we may hope is not correct in the details, because the character was said to be the darling pastor of St. Matthew's Episcopal Church, the saintliest ladies clergyman in the city, the most despicable man in his parish. And one of the plot lines is that they discover that he has fathered a child by a ballet dancer, and the bishop makes him leave the church. There is no indication that any of these actually happened with Snively. The diocese paid $90 of the outstanding $250 debt on All Saints Church, and by Easter Sunday, April 2nd, 1893, the congregation had paid off the entire debt. During this period, Snively didn't take a salary. They appointed a finance committee, and by late 1893, things are going on so well that they are reviewing sites where they can build a permanent building. And there were two under consideration, both on Dearborn Street, this one and one in the block south of Schiller. And the tax situation seemed better on this location, so it was the one that was purchased. They had the property committee appointed to make the purchase on the 7th of February, and by 2 weeks later, the congregation had raised the entire purchase price of $28,000. And by Easter Monday, March 26, 1894, St. Chrysostom's had been incorporated as a parish, not a mission. Snively was called as the first rector at a salary of $2,400 a year. They picked an architect for the new church, a man named Clinton Warren. I believe, though I am not certain, that he also designed Our Saviors, but I am not 100% certain on this. They broke ground on the 24th of July, and by November 4th, the building is completed, and they have the first services on the site. It was smaller than the present building, did not extend as far out toward the street, and there was no garden or courtyard because there was a house standing directly south of the church as well as directly north, and no parish house. We have a few items in the church that were in use at that first service. The largest of the brass processional crosses, the large silver alms basin, the baptismal font, one of the bread boxes, the silver stand for the altar service book, the hymn boards, and the cross that now stands on the Crane Chapel, but which was originally on the main altar. In the 1890s, they made a few additions to the church. They had another lectern, but someone discovered that we could buy the lectern that had been in the Gorham exhibit at the 1893 World's Fair, and they did that and sold the lectern to another church. And the pulpit was given a few years later, also designed by Gorham, in memory of an early member of the congregation who had died quite young. The first organ that was purchased doesn't seem to have been satisfactory, and a second one also seemed to give problems, but by 1897 they purchased a Kimball organ, which is said also to have been exhibited at the fair. We don't know very much about the parish activities at this time because no bulletins or parish magazines, if they even existed, survived. We do know that there were Christmas bazaars because they were written up in the newspaper society columns. And because we didn't have a parish house, they were usually in the homes of women parishioners. There is one program that remains from an event at St. Chrysostom's, the Sunday School Xmas Tree service on December 30th, 1896. They had hymns, an address by the rector, and presentation of the gifts by the children, which one presumes were items that were to be given to needy families. After this, the candy will be given out. There is to be perfect order in the distribution, followed by the singing of Praise God from whom all blessings flow. And another item from the newspapers. On the Sunday before Thanksgiving in 1898, Snively announced the time of the Thanksgiving service and made some comments that might not be out of place today. These services are arranged at this hour so that the convenience of all may be considered. It is the one day when the church is recognized by the state. We are summoned by the civil authorities of both state and nation. It seems a better form of observance than the modern ordinance of football. There are some of our younger Americans who seem to think that Thanksgiving Day was set apart for the special use of this game of questionable benefit. It is probably a noble form of athletics carried to an extreme, but the propriety and duty of religious observance on this day no one can question. The diocesan magazine, early in 1904, had a story, and it seemed that the women for Christmas 1893 had contacted Snively and said they wanted to pay for redecorating the church. And they didn't want to go ahead without consulting him because they wanted to know what colors he would prefer. And the job was done very rapidly because started on the 16th and it was done in time for Christmas Eve, and it was the interior walls and carpeting were done in a dark red. This all sounds very good, but you read the vestry minutes beginning in the 1900s, and there are a lot of references to financial difficulties. And at this time when the women are paying for redecorating the church, the 1903 budget lists as a liability 5-month salary to rector. And they borrowed money in 1905, 1906, at Snively's suggestion, they reduced his salary. And by 1907, they can't pay $225 due on the mortgage. But the Young Men's Club and the Girls Friendly Society were able to raise the money to do this. This apparently had its effect on Snively, and on April 11th, he resigned and was quite probably suffering from what would be called burnout. There is a newspaper clipping that was saved in a scrapbook belonging to a former parishioner. quits his pulpit in disgust. The Reverend T.A. Snively says Sunday golf and autos thin flock. The Reverend Thaddeus A. Snively, disgusted because some society people appear to him to be more fond of automobiling, golf, and country outings on Sunday than attendance at church services, has resigned the rectorship of St. Chrysostom's Church. His church being one of the most fashionable in the city, a falling off in attendance from these causes is said by him to have been marked. It seems the whole world is going pleasure mad. First it was the bicycle fad, then golf, and now it is automobiling, golf, and Sunday house parties. Whether my parish has been harder hit by these fads than other parishes or districts is more than I can say, but I am inclined to think so. However, 15 years in one pastorate is a long time, and I need a rest. There are 3 windows in the Crane Chapel, which were given when the church was remodeled in the 20s as a memorial to him. And they take the theme of Job, which is said to have been in reference to his unhappy life, presumably both the issues with his divorce and the decline in membership after things had started out so well at St. Chrysostom's. He left in July, and by September, a new rector had begun, the Reverend Robert M. Kempt. His family came from Troy, New York, and so may very well have been known to Snively. And his previous parish had been at St. Paul's Chapel of Trinity Church, which is now familiar to us because of the work that it did after 9/11 in the vicinity of the Twin Towers. The vestry don't seem to have paid too much attention to the fact that when Kempt was called, he was not employed by a parish. Things seem to have started out pretty well in the first months, and Kempt got the vestry to buy a house in the block south of Schiller Street for a parish house and rectory. And a newspaper story in the Tribune makes mention of plans for an institutional ministry. I'm not clear what this is. They refer to work that was done by someone else that says along the lines of so-and-so, but this name means nothing to me, so I can't be sure what they intended. This bazaar that was to fund this program was scheduled for April. By the end of May, Kempt has left the congregation, said to be much broken in health. Story in the newspapers comes out in July, however, and although it was said he resigned due to ill health, this story quoted issues with overindulgence in the use of alcohol and objectionable behavior to the choir boys. The vestry did not take any action on his resignation. It would appear, if a story in the Tribune is correct, that the 2 wardens believed that if the situation was investigated, that Kempt would be exonerated, whereas a majority of the vestry would have voted to accept the resignation. The wardens got the diocese to investigate, and the bishop appointed a committee of 2 priests and a layman who was senior warden of his parish and was a judge. And they took several months to look into the situation. And the report came out in early December. The 2 priests accepted the Kempt's explanation, but the judge said that he had seen cases like this before, and he believed the charges of the choir boys. And since the report was not unanimous, Kempt, fortunately, as I think, decided he would not return. The alcohol charges are substantiated by a story that appeared in both the Chicago and the New York papers the following summer. Kempt went back to New York, and he was out walking one time, and a man greeted him who had been a member of his congregation at St. Paul's, and he said, "Oh, you must come home with me. My wife and I have a new baby son." And Kempt said he would do this, and as they walk along, he keeps reaching in his pocket and pulling out a flask and drinking what he says is cough medicine. He gets into the house, sees the baby, rushes out, fills a pitcher of water, starts pouring it over the baby, saying, "Nobody but me is going to baptize this baby." The parents try to stop him and can't do it, and they end up calling the police, and he is arrested for public drunkenness. So you have to feel it was probably a very good thing that he did not return to St. Chrysostom's after his leave. And he never seems to have had another parish, but never was asked to step down from ordained ministries listed in clergy directories for the rest of his life. We are moving into the years of Norman Hutton, moving from low point in the parish history to very happy and good times. In 1928, looking back on 20 years earlier, the situation was described as, "We had but the shell of a parish. We were few in number, 25 families," another source says, "discouraged and almost disbanded." A source outside the congregation offered to pay 1 year's salary for the incoming rector, and if after that time the parish couldn't manage it on its own, then it would have to close. The candidates begin to come to St. Chrysostom's, and the first man that is called early in 1909, not surprisingly given the situation, refuses the call immediately. But the second priest who comes is the Reverend Norman Hutton, who is in his early 30s and doesn't feel that his current parish in Long Island offers enough of a challenge. "Most people would have thought it was hopeless," said a review of the parish history in 1934. Actually, it was Norman Hutton who said this. "I too would have felt this had I not met the handful of devoted souls who had stood by in the hour of trial." And in 1928 again, "Within a year, our parish activities had already made such progress under the influence of Norman Hutton's lovable personality and cheery enthusiasm that recourse to the salary guarantee was never required." And I think we have to feel that he, probably more than any one person, is responsible for the church as it has been since during and since the years that he was our rector. He remembered what the church building looked like when he came in. There were places in the roof with holes that let in the light. Rain had discolored the red calcimined walls, so carefully paid for by the women only 5 years before. The iron gas pipes were coiled around wooden nave pipes and were at all angles. Gas was the only means of illumination. The sanctuary was supported by 4 piles that had gradually sunk, and the weight hung upon 2 sturdy props. Norman Hutton came to St. Chrysostom's as rector in May, and at his first vestry meeting that month, an unknown vestry member advanced the money to repair the roof, repaint the interior from red to gray, and make other repairs. 1909 was also the year of a new member of the vestry, a man named John Redmond, who continued on the vestry for 50 years. And his daughter Betty was born in 1918 and was a member of the congregation from her baptism until her death in 2013. And I spoke to her several times about the church and things that she remembered, and a lot of what is in my comments on the earlier rectors is based on the things that she said. One very nice story that she told about their family and Norman Hutton is that her birthday was in late June, same day as Norman Hutton's. And often his family would have gone off on vacation by that time, and he had to stay at the church until the end of June. And when this was the case, then the Redmonds would always contact him and say, please come and join us for dinner, and we can celebrate your birthday and Betty's, which I think is a very nice story. By Easter 1910, they are reporting a steady increase in church attendance. Financial reports are good. The vestry minutes sound very optimistic. The next year, they introduce a new system for giving. It used to be that you rented a pew and you made offerings at Christmas and Easter, but they introduced the envelope system. And this got a very good response from the congregation, and by Easter 1912, the vestry minutes have a very happy note, and they say this is the first time we've been able to say this, but all our debts are paid. Another new innovation, they had 2 clergy known for mission work who came and conducted an exhibition, Every Member Canvas. And it, too, seems to have been successful because by January 1916, they had over $6,000 in pledges. And the envelope subscribers had practically doubled, but open plate offerings had not decreased. With the additional number of pledging members and additional financial records that were needed, they hired a parish secretary and an envelope secretary, the first women apparently to be on the parish staff. The church was doing well in attendance, and by fall 1912, work was underway to construct a parish house adjoining the church. And the building includes the present Harding Room and the space above and below it. Originally, in the basement, they planned to put in what they called a swimming tank so that they could have boys after school could use it. This was never constructed. And on the first floor, a auditorium and a stage for girls' dramatics. The space that now is occupied by the restroom and the small kitchen in the Harding room was originally that stage, and the space above it where the acolytes now have their vestments was, I think, the dressing room for performances. And there was some place in the building there was also space for the Sunday school, which had been 30 people and was now up to 130. And putting in the new parish house meant that they had to make some changes to the sanctuary space. And the women funded the new sanctuary, and also using proceeds from their 1912 bazaar, paid to have the church electrified. The first rector, Thaddeus Snively, had apparently left Chicago after he resigned from St. Chrysostom's. Doesn't seem to have taken another parish, but he came back sometimes to visit friends in Chicago, and apparently on one of these visits he was taken ill, and he died in December. The funeral was at St. Chrysostom's, and he was buried at Graceland Cemetery. He was still remembered fondly by members of the congregation, and the vestry voted to name the parish house after him, and as a result, at least one donor who had already given gave an additional sum of money on hearing that the Snively was to be honored by the name of the building. Parish house formally opened on December 4th, 1913, with the Women's Guild Christmas sale. Just 2 months later, a difficult time for the church. After the 8 o'clock service on Sunday, February 8th, 1914, there was a fire started in the church. And fortunately, there was some kind of a vestry meeting going on, and the vestry and the rector salvaged everything out of the church building and got it into the new parish house. A Presbyterian clergyman, the Reverend John T. Stone from Fourth Presbyterian Church, happened to be out walking in the neighborhood, and he saw what was happened, and he came in and also helped. And firemen came and put out the fire, but it is sad to note that the vestry minutes say that more damage was done by the firemen chopping at the floor, wainscoting, etc., than by the actual burning. But repairs were immediately underway, and by Easter Sunday, April 12th, they were back in the new church, having held services in the parish house in the interim. It's possible that the vestry were at St. Chrysostom's on a Sunday morning to discuss a proposal that had come up somewhat earlier, which was that St. Chrysostom should merge with Trinity Church on the near south side. Trinity Church, as people were moving north, was having financial difficulties, and the plan was that the two congregations would merge. St. Chrysostom's would be the site of the church, Hutton would be the rector, the rector at Trinity Church would become the assistant or associate, but the church would take the name Trinity Church. This story got in the papers, and a number of people who had had ties to Trinity Church were disturbed by the fact that it was going to be moving and leaving its old site, merging, and enough money came to Trinity so that they didn't have the plan proceed. There was an Italian mission west of the church, somewhere on Clybourne Avenue, St. John's Italian Mission. It was not intended to attract practicing Catholics, but to reach those lapsed from their faith. And in December 1912, St. Chrysostom's took on responsibility for this. At first, a parishioner from St. Chrysostom's came and read morning prayer at St. John's in the morning, and Norman Hutton came in the evening to conduct an evening service at St. John's, and the St. John's congregation came to St. Chrysostom's to receive communion. But few months later, the Reverend John Anastasi was hired as the full-time priest in charge of this mission, and by late 1913, the diocese had taken over responsibility for the Italian congregation. The choir boys in 1909 and 1910, as a encouragement to get them to participate in services, were taken on a 2-week camping trip. And in the first years that they did this, 1909 and 1910, they rented a camping site. And the John Astleycock, who was then the organist and choir master, took them and supervised them. And there was a woman who came along and prepared very lavish meals. The list of the menus appears in some of the parish bulletins, and boy, those kids ate well. And they were, there was a St. John Chrysostom Church near the 1909 site, and the boys came and sang there on a Sunday. By 1911, the camping trip was popular, but it was a real nuisance to have to keep going out every year to find a campsite. And the parish purchased a permanent site on Lake Chapin near Berrien Springs, Michigan. And the campers first summer had to do some work on the site, but they also had time for activities, swimming, riding, hiking, and fishing. Norman Hutton came up with the first group of campers, and they went by boat, and the boat was overturned somehow, and Norman Hutton went down in the water, and he came up quoting a Latin hymn about the time is late, the hour is evil, keep watch, but he quoted it in Latin. They had a Boy Scout troop, one of the very first in the city, that began in the parish in 1911, and in 1913, they used the campsite for 2 weeks. And by 1917, a Girl Scout troop came for 2 weeks, the first girls to use the site. And there were, for the first time, they opened the camp to groups outside the church. They adopted the name Camp Orinoco that year, taken from the name of, they said, an Indian chief who had lived in the area. And for most of the time that this camp was in existence, which was until World War II, the camp director was a man named Frederick Spaulding, who had been confirmed in the first confirmation class at St. Chrysostom's in 1893. He worked as a proofreader at the Chicago Daily News, and I am told could have taken a much higher position there, but refused to do it because then he could not have been away to work at the camp in the summer. Another activity for young people, the 1910s was the era when new types of dances were coming in, which not everybody approved of. But St. Chrysostom's scheduled a dancing class at the church, and for New Year's Eve 1914, they had a dance, which was written up in the Tribune on the 29th of December. Church to have cabaret, St. Chrysostom's to have girls tango and frappe on New Year's Eve. You may tango if you like. When you are tired with dancing, you may sit at a round table and sip frappe out of a glass. A stringed orchestra will set the pulses throbbing. This is the plan by which the young people of St. Chrysostom's will be kept from going downtown New Year's Eve, where cabarets said to be of a demoralizing character will be in operation. Assurance is given by the rector that everything about the dance will be proper and that the young people will be carefully chaperoned. And this went on, I think, until World War I. By 1915, the parish is outgrowing the space in the parish house, and as I mentioned, the original church, there was a house directly south as well as directly north of the church. They didn't have the courtyard and the garden. And the parish bought this house and turned it into space. It was the first time that Norman Hutton had had his own office, and they moved the Sunday school there. The next thing they were going to do was to discuss putting a new front on the church. And they were about to start fundraising when April 1917 came, and the United States entered the war, and so, of course, it was put on hold.
These are stirring times, times when heroism and self-sacrifice are the rule, not the exception. The Church's extension is threatened by the anxiety to accomplish the immediate demands of this world war. I have hoped these 9.5 years of my rectorship to see the 10th year a banner year in mission giving, and the parish the first in the diocese. I cannot give up this cherished hope, even in the face of our many demands. Faithfully, Norman Hutton, Rector, October 20th, 1918.
There were parish magazines published at this time once a month, and each magazine included a list of the people in service. And this was not just men in the military, but men and women who were doing war-related activities, nurses, Red Cross workers, YMCA volunteers, and so on. And in 1917, 3 parishioners made arrangements for 75 Navy men at Great Lakes to be brought to St. Chrysostom's for a Thanksgiving Day dance. And the nation was asked to conserve heat, and so they only heated the church on Sundays. they eliminated the evening service, and they scheduled all the parish activities on Tuesdays and Fridays, and didn't heat the parish house on the other days of the week. There are very nice stories in the parish magazine from people who were overseas. A particularly moving letter from a young woman who was a nurse, and how they would hear the vehicles coming and would know that injured people would be brought in and they had to be ready, and her taking care of one young man who was dying, and she was with him, and later had a very badly misspelled letter from the boy's mother saying that he had written about how the nurse had taken care of him so well, and she appreciated this. The parish was struck by the 1918 flu epidemic, as were certainly most places in the United States at that time. The bazaar was canceled, and they asked for contributions in the amount to the Women's Guild in the amount of what people might have spent at the bazaar. And at about this time, and perhaps connected with the flu epidemic, though we can't be sure, the parish began the practice of receiving communion by intinction, where you dipped your bread in the cup rather than drinking from the common cup.
My dear parishioners, this is a time of great unsettlement due to the efforts of the war, the influenza epidemic, and to the great strain of added work. Under these conditions, attendance at our service has fallen off. We cannot build up a strong parish with unfilled pews. I ask you to contribute yourself to this purpose and be present Sunday. May I remind you that the well-filled church inspires the rector and gives spirit to the worship that is contagious. If you felt you could really help, I am sure you would be willing to make a sacrifice. In my judgment, there is nothing more important than increased attendance. I ask your help. Faithfully, Norman Hutton, November 1st, 1918. My dear parishioners, the armistice has been signed and permanent peace is in sight. The services this Sunday will reflect our thanksgiving for the consummation of our hopes and sacrifices. Please make an effort to be present and take part heartily in the service. There are 129 stars on our service flag. We plan to have each name commemorated by a Liberty Bond in the Victory Endowment for the parish. Each name will be recorded in the permanent records of the Parish Endowment Fund and be a lasting memorial of each man and woman who has been in the national service. The great offering for this purpose will be taken on Thanksgiving Day. War-saving stamps will gladly be received when bonds cannot be given. Faithfully, Norman Hutton, November 15th, 1918.
When the war ends, there are some very happy stories from men in service overseas, that they write about how they celebrated when the armistice came. And another happy note for 1918, first surplus in the parish history. 1919 was Hutton's 10th anniversary as rector, and there are no records of any special parish festivities, but there was a deanery luncheon honoring him held at the parish, catered by the women, and many people in attendance, presumably from the diocese as well as the parish. The house directly south of the church at what was then 1420 was the one that had been turned into a parish house in 1915. By 1919, that was getting crowded, and they started considered another capital campaign. The vestry were a little bit hesitant for one reason. They were afraid that Norman Hutton would accept a call to another parish and that they were going to be in the middle of a campaign and would have to do it without him. And so he and the vestry talked, and Hutton assured them that he would not leave for the duration of the campaign, and the vestry in that case said they were willing to go ahead. There was an architect in the parish named William Parsons who said that he would not make a money gift to the campaign, but instead he drafted an overall plan for the site, which he gave to the parish at no charge. And this was the plan that was adopted for the new church and parish house. The house at 1416 and 1414, the two houses were bought and were turned into one building. Parish office on the first floor, space for a rectory and other housing on the upper floors. Tear down the building at 1420 immediately south of the church, leaving space for the courtyard and the garden, and constructing the cloister, gym, and guild room to link the 1414 building with the church at 1424. The plan for the church was to extend the building further toward the street and move the entrance from the street side to face the courtyard. But at Norman Hutton's request, work began first on the parish house because they wanted it to be available so they could do outreach activities. Chester Walcott was selected as the architect for the church and the parish house renovation, and in the years when each building was completed, they won prizes for best redesigned building. The gymnasium was to allow basketball and other indoor activities. At that period, indoor baseball was apparently popular. And they put a stage at one end of the gym, apparently no longer using the one that had been in the present Harding room. And the space on the second floor was for parish organizations, and the Women's Guild met there, so it became known as the Guild Room. The space that Norman Hutton had used for his study, just south of where we are sitting now, was turned into a chapel for the Sunday school, kindergarten and primary Sunday school classes. And most of the church school classes were in the basement. And the original parish house, the space that had no name when it was just the parish house, became known as the North Room. The parish house work was completed and it was dedicated on April 29th, 1923. The architect's plan had included the outdoor pulpit facing the courtyard and garden, and that was used at that service. They had it outside. Fortunately, the weather cooperated. It was a big procession. They had trumpeters, the junior choir, the senior choir, Junior Brotherhood of St. Andrew, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, various people, the architects, the wardens, the vestry, and a number of clergy. Several took part in the service. There were 3 addresses in the course of this service. People in the 20s, I guess, were willing to sit patiently through 3 of them. One was by the Reverend John T. Stone, the Presbyterian minister, who had some years before helped rescue items when the church was on fire in 1914. A representative from the Ethical Culture Society, and the diocesan bishop, Charles Anderson. And he spoke about how the church had revived from nearly dying and hoped that it would have a ministry that would not be just to its own congregation but would reach out as well. And this was the case because in 1924 the parish hired a social worker to develop a program of community activities, which later became the parish community center. And they had sewing classes for girls, manual training, which we now call shop for boys. I'm glad to say that both boys and girls were included in the cooking classes. They had team games for boys and dramatics for girls. And this program stayed in existence for over 30 years and was a very good outreach program for the community. By the 20s, the camp was really thriving, and they had a number of groups from outside the parish. For 2 weeks in 1920, a group of mothers and children came, and choir members from various churches and children from the Chicago Nursery and Half Orphan Asylum came. And by 1923, the camp was open from Memorial Day till after Labor Day. An additional area of land was given to the camp in the mid-20s by the Cox family. Their older son, Rensselaer, had died as a teenager in a horseback riding accident, and in his memory, his mother gave the money to buy the land. And Rensselaer Cox's younger brother, Bill Cox, remained active in the parish all his life and was a vestry member and a warden, and there are still members of the Cox family who remain active in the church today. Having finished the work on the parish house, in December 1923, they started a fund to rebuild the church and had a good sum by early 1924. There were large gifts, including $50,000 from Richard Crane Jr. For a bell tower, but smaller gifts were also welcome. There was an announcement in the bulletin 1 week, and they figured out that if you pledged $200 over a 5-year period. They worked it out somehow, and it was something like $4 a month. And they encouraged people to do this because they said, well, this should be a popular fund and not just dependent on the large donors. And they would list contributions that had been received in the past period, and there were a number of these $4 contributions given, which I think was a very good thing. Interior design of the old church had been very popular. The arches in the church, the arrangement of the windows, the beams, all appealed to the congregation, and they wanted to keep those and not do away with them. But to get extra space, they extended the church further toward the street and moved the entrance from facing the street to facing the courtyard. In March 1925, the construction began, and from the last service in the old church was on Easter Sunday, April 12th. And then they had services in the gym until Sunday, November 1st, All Saints' Day, when the new church was ready for occupation. And the first stained glass window was dedicated that day. It was given by Henry and Elizabeth Chapin in memory of their son Chester, who died when he was just 14. Mrs. Chapin hoped that people would see how beautiful the window was and would be moved to make donations for other windows. The stained glass, nearly all the stained glass in the church was designed by Charles Connick, or his firm Connick Associates. And one donor of a window specified to Norman Hutton that he wanted to give a Tiffany window. And Norman Hutton did not like Tiffany. And I learned when I was in correspondence with the Connick Associates in Massachusetts, I asked them what information they had about the parish windows, and they told me that Hutton had written to them that somebody wanted to give what he called one of those horrible Tiffany things, but I have refused it, and I would certainly rather give up the money than spoil the church. And I do think that the window would have gone on the north side where there isn't a lot of light. And Tiffany windows, if the lighting is not good, don't look their best. And Connick was big on designing windows that would be good in every sort of lighting condition. And I think we can be very grateful that he was the one who did the windows. There's a firm, not a firm, but an association of can't even remember what the name is, and I'm a member, but they have regular meetings, and a few years ago they had one in Chicago, and the activities included tours of some of the churches with Connick windows, and one was St. Chrysostom's, and I made it a point of being there, and they had some very interesting things to say. Connick modeled his windows on French stained glass and used a lot of blues and reds. The man who at first wanted to give the Tiffany window did eventually come round, and he gave a conic window, and it was in memory of his late wife, and it's the one showing the Virgin Mary. And a rather nice thing about the windows on the north side of the church is that every one of them honors a woman saint. The one closest to the altar is the Virgin Mary holding Jesus. Then there is St. Elizabeth with John the Baptist. Then there are St. Mary and St. Martha of Bethany. And when I take people through on tours of the church, particularly when it's women, I like to point this out and say, well, we are really ahead of our times in doing this. And I think the John the Baptist window was given in memory of a couple, but the others were all given in memory of women, the wives or mothers of the donors. The present high altar was dedicated in November 1926. It was given by Chauncey and Mary Kempt in memory of their son who had been killed in World War I. The Kempts had not been members of the parish at this time, so he's not listed on the honor roll, but he was, they moved to the north side later, and they made this gift. And Betty Redmond told me that the rumor went round that the altar had not been built for the church, but had been built for another church, which in the end couldn't afford it. And there's nothing in vestry minutes or in the bulletin on the day of dedication to indicate who did the work. And Richard Hoskins has looked this over and says someplace on the altar or the reredos is a date of 1921, and since it wasn't installed in St. Chrysostom's till 1926, that would seem to confirm Betty's memory. Stained glass windows were dedicated at various times from 1925 until 1928. Not long after the new church opened, Richard Crane, who had made the donation for the tower, made an additional gift of a 43-bell carillon. And this was the first carillon to be installed in the United States west of the eastern seaboard. And the Chicago news media took considerable pride in this. The Tribune's London correspondent went to the factory in England where the bells were being made and sent a report back. There were lots of stories in the newspapers. There were group in the parish sponsored a lecture on the carillon early in 1927, and the bells were supposed to come and be installed in time for Easter on April 17th. But what happened is recorded in the Chicago Daily News of March 2nd. Bell expert lost, so church is silent. Carillon here, but if it is to be heard Easter, wandering bellman must be found. The man apparently figured he had lots of time and he was stopping and visiting carillons elsewhere on the eastern seaboard. A.H. Townsend, sent by Gillette and Johnson to set up the carillon, sent a letter to Chicago saying that he had arrived in the United States and pending the arrival of the 47,240 bells would look around a bit. Today the bells, instead of being taken to St. Chrysostom's, are being drawn in their crates into a warehouse until Mr. Townsend's whereabouts become more definitely known. John T. Redmond, vestryman, was near distraction when he learned of the arrival of the Carillon and sent wires and radio and telepathy at work to find Mr. Townsend. Failing, he gave orders to insure the bells for $25,000 and store them. Even yet, there is time for the installation to be made so that all may be in readiness for Easter morn, but Mr. Townsend must be found quickly. The next day, happier story. Bell hanger found, carillon to ring. Townsend arrived and he met with John Redmond, who was very much relieved. And the first performance did come off on Easter Sunday before the 11 o'clock service and was broadcast on radio station WMAQ. The organist at St. Chrysostom's, Harold Simons, who had come to the parish a couple of years before, had learned to play the carillon so that he could perform it at this and on other occasions. All these events, it was a very happy time, but there was one thing that was going on that was not so good, was that Norman Hutton's health was getting worse, and that during this period, twice he had been given 6 months leave of absence. I think he was in the middle of one of these and he came back and officiated on Easter Sunday and was there for the first performance of the Carillon. And in 1928, the vestry reluctantly agreed to his resignation. One of his children was also not well, and he and his family moved, I think, to California and took a year or two there, and then later he went to a smaller parish. They had hoped to consecrate the new church before Hutton's last Sunday on December 2nd, but there was some red tape involved that they had not completed, and so instead of having the consecration, they had a special service on Thanksgiving Day dedicating the remaining windows and other gifts that had been recently received. At the present time, when a rector leaves, it's the general practice that you get an interim rector for the period until the next rector comes. This was not the case in 1928. However, in the slightly over 3 years after Hutton's resignation, there were 2 rectors and one temporary rector. So in a way, it really served the same function as the interim period does now. The man who was called to succeed Hutton was the Reverend Henry Prior Allman Abbott, and where in 1909 St. Chrysostom's was not a place that you would choose to come to unless you, like Norman Hutton, really wanted a challenge. The situation was very different in 1928, and Abbott was one of the best-known clergy in North America. He'd been born in Canada, and he'd been at churches both in Canada and the U.S. And he was called before Norman Hutton actually left the parish, and was at St. Chrysostom's the week after Hutton's last service as rector. One thing he did immediately was that he started celebrations of Holy Communion twice during the week as well as on Sundays, which had not been done before. He said in the bulletin that I feel I need the sacrament more often than once a week, and perhaps others feel the same way. And although we've had some breaks when there have been clergy vacancies, we have continued to have the midweek services until the present. He started a new program. I don't know how long it lasted, but for younger women to come to the church and meet to roll bandages for hospitals. And it seemed like things were going very well, but he came on December 9th, was his first Sunday at St. Chrysostom's. On January 30th, he is elected Bishop of Lexington, Kentucky, and he accepts. I would have thought that the congregation would feel really annoyed about this. Betty Redmond said no, they didn't, and that Abbott had made friends in the congregation, and that many people kept in touch with him, including her father. A priest at the diocesan office many years ago told me that the joke that went around about Abbott was that when he got the call that he had been elected bishop, he said, "Of course I accept. What diocese did you say this was?" But apparently the congregation took considerable pride in the fact that he had been elected bishop, and one of the vestry members found out about train service to Lexington, and through him you could get tickets. It was a morning service, and the train got in early morning. It was an overnight ride, so I hope that the train wasn't late. And the parish gave him a set of bishop's robes, which he thought was quite generous of them. They had a very interesting choice of a man to serve in the interim, and this was the new religion editor of the Chicago Tribune, who was an Episcopal priest, the Reverend John Evans. He had come to the Tribune earlier that year. He'd had a parish in Escanaba, Michigan, and he was apparently hit it off well with the congregation, and he took the opportunity to write a lengthy article for the Tribune on Kempt, Orinoco, which you can see framed behind me there. And he stayed on until all through the summer, and then during the summer, the Reverend Stephen Keeler, who was at St. Paul's Church in Akron, was called as the new rector. Previously, Keeler had had a parish in Massachusetts near the summer home of one of the vestry members, who apparently was the one to recommend him as a candidate. He arrived in, I think, about September 1929, got along very well with Evans, and asked the parish to let him hire Evans as his associate, which the parish was glad to do. His first messages to the congregation were very upbeat, but then shortly after he gets there comes Black Friday in October, and things change drastically. We read in some source that The parish provided relief to 31 families at Christmas in 1929. Whether these from the parish or outside, we don't know. And there were the messages in the bulletin at first, going on to ever greater things, and then it was, cast your care on him who cares for you, are the later themes. During Keeler's tenure, the first two candidates from the ordained ministry in the parish, Clyde Wilson and George Wilson, don't know if they were related. Don't know about George Wilson, but Clyde Wilson, both were ordained at St. Chrysostom's. Clyde Wilson went on to other churches, and in the 50s came to preach at an evening service at St. Chrysostom's because he was being considered as a candidate for the vacancy at Grace Church in Oak Park, and he was indeed called to that position. The community center by this time had two paid heads, but by the 1930s, they had to stop paying them, and they stayed on for a short time because one of them was also a football coach at Lane Tech and got some salary, and the parish gave them space in the parish house for living. Keeler, by this time, and his family are not living in the 1414 building. They apparently preferred something that was a little bit further away from the scene of activity, and the parish first rented and in later years bought an apartment at 1235 Astor Street, which rectors lived in until the late 70s. April 1931, once again, the parish gets the news that their rector has been elected a bishop. Keeler is a bit more hesitant about this. They had not consulted him about the election. Apparently there had been no slate of nominees, but he had been elected unanimously, and he felt that given the circumstances, it was right for him to consider whether he should they should accept. And he did eventually, after visiting the diocese, say that he would accept. What was done sometimes at that time, and certainly has never been done that I know of now, is that the bishop was consecrated in his former parish rather than at the cathedral of the diocese he would be serving. And Keeler's consecration was scheduled here at St. Chrysostom's on June 24th, 1931. Here again, I have information from Betty Redmond. She had been at that service, and I said, "Well, what do you remember about it?" And she said, "Oh, it was terribly hot." This was well before the church was air-conditioned, and according to the story in the paper, people had to be actually carried out of the church, keeling over from the heat. And since there were a lot of people from the Diocese of Minnesota that would be there, plus I assume a lot of Chicago diocesan clergy, space was limited, and they had a radio set up so that the service could be broadcast into the parish house, and people could hear it if they couldn't see it. He stayed on over the summer and didn't leave Chicago until September. And then at that time, Evans stepped in again as interim until the next rector came.